Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Data Dispatch. What another crazy day in the market with some decent volatility and choppiness, especially with this first trade deal that we can call it from the Trump administration that came out today. We'll be talking about this in a few moments, but nonetheless, Palantir is returning with a ton of buying pressure after it has announced a new major partnership. Palantir is on fire with these partnerships, these collaborations. I feel like they are making these deals left and right, which is very bullish for this individual stock. And we see a big return of buying momentum today and some interesting technical patterns that we can talk about that Palantir could possibly be surpassing its all-time high in the near future, depending on what's going to be happening, of course, with the economic volatility. So before we get into the news here, if you're a new or returning viewer, hit that like button, subscribe for daily videos. It really helps the algorithm. And let's hit 25,000 subscribers. Quarter of 100,000. I can't thank you guys enough. Pop it up here. Palantir closes at 119.15, up about 7.85%. Now, before we talk about where it's trading right now, the big news is that Palantir, from their official X account here, announces that it is proud to partner with the Joint Commission to support healthcare organizations across the U.S. in benchmarking quality and improving outcomes by leveraging advanced AI and data capabilities. Now, the Joint Commission is a very large organization that works to bring standardization, making sure things are basically credentialed across different types of healthcare niches in terms of the whole healthcare industry. So the fact that Palantir is partnering with them is a very large organization and can probably open up the doors in terms of credibility for partnering with many different types of healthcare systems, organizations, applications. The list can continue. So where we see Palantir continuing to trade right now in the overnight hours is at 119.49, only about $5 away from its all-time high. We're seeing a lot of momentum that is rising near this buy point right here. And what specifically in terms of this technical pattern this article is talking about here is the stock is well on its way to building out a cut base that basically is at its all-time high of 125. That's marked as the buy point. So I think if Palantir is able to hit that and break that level of resistance in terms of just that psychological all-time high, then it gets into, and correlated of coupled with a lot of bullishness in the market, then it gets to price discovery. Once you hit all-time high, it's like, okay, we haven't been to these levels before. How high can this stock go from here before it starts to cool off or we see any pullbacks and things like that? So that could technically, if it all gets set up correctly, could be a possibility in terms of short-term trading patterns. So Palantir is also soaring today. I think investors are kind of bullish with what we saw with Donald Trump unveiling the broad outline of this trade agreement with the United Kingdom. Now, I watched the live press conference or the phone call that we saw in the Oval Office, and there was a lot of kind of mumble jumble, hearing out some details here and there. But however, the final details are still being written up in the next coming weeks. And they'll have it all very conclusive, they say there. Nothing was actually formally signed. And there are some specifics of the deal that remain unclear. It was about beef and basically trying to bring lots of additional export revenue into the U.S. We'll talk about here in a moment. But basically how the Dow Jones closes about 200 points higher, and the market generally kind of liked this. We saw, I think just the fact that we saw, in reality, we saw live some basically deals being announced, and we have the continuation of that with the Treasury Secretary that's going to China, I believe, this weekend. It's going to be meeting. We'll be talking about that all in a moment here. What Trump says basically gives a buy signal. But what we see here with the S&P 500, NASDAQ up about 0.5% and 1% respectively. The Wall Street's been waiting for some type of a deal, just something. They're getting sick of these negotiations. So the fact that we have more, conclusive evidence that a deal, the first one is coming with the United Kingdom, I think brought some bullishness in here. And that was kind of the typical reaction that we saw. Other than that, still a decent bit of choppiness, but the market did like that. So we'll see how that continues, especially with the big meeting that is occurring. We'll talk about that here in just a second. But basically, with the 10% tariff, that sounds like that baseline tariff is still going to remain on the United Kingdom, according to a graphic that was posted on True Social by Trump himself. However, the president noted that 10% UK tariff could actually be in the low end of the deals with future countries, so that they could be higher because of surpluses. What we're seeing here, on top of that, Treasury Secretary, like I had mentioned before, remember, he's going to meet with the Chinese counterparts in Switzerland this weekend to discuss trade and economic issues. I think this will be bigger than these deals that are working out with the United Kingdom right here, because remember, those tariffs are scaled up to about 145% here, even as he lowered reciprocal tariffs for some of the other countries. So that could be bringing some optimism that deals can be made out before the July 9th expiration of the reciprocal pause. Remember, we still had that reciprocal pause that is in about 2 months exactly from here on out. So tech stocks, Boeing here, we're seeing here, leading to more buying pressure in the market. And with these trade talks, you even had Trump saying, during the actual thing, saying you better go out and buy stock right now. Remember the last time he announced now it's a good time to buy stock, we had a decent rally. So talk about those insider, kind of exposure announcements. Sounds like the president is making them for us. So we'll see what happens there. One of the big things that we have also talked about, especially for the semiconductor stocks, and why NVIDIA was a little more shaky today on how that could have had an influence on the market. We see NVIDIA closing at about 117 right here. It was kind of consolidating at about 113 and then had this push up to 117, 118. If any of you guys missed that, we talked about it briefly yesterday. But that was talking about here, the Trump administration is set to end the Biden's U.S. chip export restrictions. This is known as the AI diffusion rule. The last few days of Biden's days in office, he came out with this AI diffusion rule, which basically gave restrictions in terms of exporting kind of the freeness of that from NVIDIA, AMD, the big semiconductor chip stocks. Trump says that basically they're going to be looking at these regulations. They're going to be rescinding them, and I think coming out with their own type of rules. So with the uncertainty that kind of lies around that, I think one of the questions is, when is this going to happen? Because the bill was supposed to take place or go into effect on May 15th, I believe. Oh, yeah, right here, May 15th. So the question is, when are they actually going to be rescinding the deal? Because it says here they are prepared, and what are going to be the new regulations that come? Hopefully they are lighter compared to this. Otherwise it'd be like, hey, why would they be doing all this work to rescind this deal and coming out with stricter regulations in terms of, I know we want to keep a lot of the AI race and all the manufacturing, top of the technology within the US. So exporting, there's probably going to be some type of regulations because we don't want to give it all to China, but deregulating that a little bit, long story short, I think is going to be good for the semiconductor stocks. And what you see with NVIDIA right here, I think it's just kind of awaiting that out. And they also have earnings that'll be coming at the end of the month. So it'll be interesting to see their price action. One of the other stocks that we have kind of been looking at is AMD with these interesting setups here. AMD's back at $100. And I think in reaction to the AI dismissal rule that we saw for the possible rescinding of that, you see AMD that gaps up to a nice green wick candle bar here, hitting up to about 105, but actually pulling back towards the end. So these stocks, I think, are kind of sitting on the sidelines, and tomorrow will be a very interesting day. Some of the other stocks that we've been covering, like Tempest, is doing very, very, very well after they reported their earnings, has continued to be on a run up to about 65 right here. Tempest is growing at a rapid pace, and HIMS is still doing very well. Remember, they came out with their earnings, had a little bit of a disappointing guidance for the next quarter, but otherwise smashed their current earnings. And HIMS has been on a good run too, up here to 51.40. So a lot of these smaller stocks with smaller market caps are moving quite well. Of course, they carry a lot more volatility with them, and the risk for downside potentials, even as they get to kind of their all-time high levels. I think some of the bigger indicators in my own prediction on the market here is just basically what are going to be the remarks and conclusions from the China meeting in Switzerland this weekend, and what's going to be the progress or the frequency of these trade deals coming in before the July 9th deadline of the reciprocal tariffs. That has more of an impact, and I think that could cause large swings in this market. Other than that, what's your opinion here on Palantir? Do you think it's going to be passing and setting new all-time highs here in the near future, especially as these crazy partnerships keep getting announced? And what's your opinion on today's press conference with the trade deal and how these other stocks are going to be reacting? Peace out. Take care. I'll catch you guys later. Have a great night.